Voice teachers are entrusted with a lot of different kinds of information about their students. Because we often develop deeper relationships with students than, for example, a classroom teacher might, students will often share with us more about themselves, their family, their day-to-day life. We may also have a front row seat to a student's health or wellness concerns. And given the inherent vulnerability of singing, we often coach students through challenging or even triggering moments. And yet, we must never adopt the role of a therapist. We are voice teachers. Our job is to help encourage the student toward more sustainable and expressive singing. With that said, while most of us don't have the background of a mental health professional, that doesn't mean that our relationships with students are devoid of any sort of psychological interaction. And so we are required to know at least something about psychology if we are to engage our students with integrity, knowledge, and just plain common sense. It's a fine line, though. And within the voice studio, all of this can become murky very quickly. Hi, my name is David Sisco. My pronouns are he, him, and welcome to my new-ish podcast, Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy. This podcast is dedicated to the art and practice of teaching singers. It is an extension of my forthcoming book of the same title, which will be released by Routledge Press in summer 2025. Today, we're going to be talking about the similarities and differences between teachers and therapists, how to foster healthy student-teacher relationships, and when to refer students to a mental health professional. My special guest today is psychotherapist Dr. Ritu Agarwal. Before we discuss this with Ritu, let's consider some research that explains why the student-teacher relationship is so complex. First, we need to talk about transference and countertransference. Douglas L. Robertson defines this phenomenon in an article for Innovative Higher Education. He writes, transference is an unconscious displacement of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors from a previous significant relationship onto a current relationship, a phenomenon that teachers and students both enact with each other, sometimes resulting in a dramatic intensification of those relationships. Transference and countertransference can be either positive or negative and obfuscate the actual relationship, sometimes causing us or the student to act in an inappropriate or dysregulated way. As Harriet L. Schwartz notes in her fantastic book, Connected Teaching, we should not deny that we experience these emotions, nor should we imagine we will reach a state where we do not have them. Rather, by understanding our emotions more deeply, in this case, learning to more quickly identify when we are having a disproportional reaction, we can increase our effectiveness as teachers and spend less time in heightened negative emotional states. So that's the baseline. It's very human, right? And what about the student? Researchers Alice Marwick and Dana Boyd explain that students may experience what has become known as content collapse. Social media technologies collapse multiple audiences into single contexts, making it difficult for people to use the same techniques online that they do to handle multiplicity in face-to-face conversation. Context collapse can potentially blur a student's perspective on our role as teachers, and as a result, oversharing may become commonplace. Finally, as voice teachers, most of our day is spent alone with different students coming in and out of our studios. And while there may be a wonderful sense of autonomy in what we do, that also means that we have to set aside our own thoughts and feelings in order to put the spotlight on our students. That's hard, and it can become lonely work. A 2019 article explains, while you might spend your day with people, you aren't connecting socially with them. Instead, you're putting a lot of your own emotion and energy into the bond you create. They can't reciprocate this. So while you might get a sense of satisfaction and reward from helping, at the end of the day, the emotional output can increase feelings of isolation. And so, while it may not be our intention to play therapist, because transference and countertransference exist in all relationships, because students sometimes blur the boundaries by oversharing, and because we want to feel connected and helpful to our students, it can be very easy for us to cross the line. All the more reason why we need to be clear on our role as voice teachers and how it differs from that of a therapist. Enter my colleague and friend, Dr. Ritu Agarwal. Ritu is a clinical psychologist with 16 years of experience, specializing in trauma and chronic stress. Her approach blends relational and somatic techniques rooted in neuroscience that examine the connection between body and mind. A proud pansexual, gender fluid, American born, confused Desi, raised in the American South, Ritu's lived experience fuels her passion for supporting BIPOC and QTPOC communities. She earned her doctorate from the California School of Professional Psychology, San Francisco, and recently completed a fellowship in somatics and social justice at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. Ritu is now part of a thriving private practice in Manhattan. Ritu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, it's such an honor to, listeners don't know this, but I have had many a walk with you in our neighborhood. Ritu lives not in my old building, our old building actually. And we've taken many walks together and discussed many of the topics of my book. So, like, you are very much in the acknowledgments of the book
Mm,
because of your contributions to it and just helping me kind of think through things. So, I'm so grateful to you.
Me too. It's so special. I'm so excited to do this with you. I can't believe this is like your ability to manifest is like next level.
That's very God. Well, I'm gonna manifest this book coming out in summer 2025. That's what I'm gonna manifest. So far as I know, we're on point. So so excited. Well, I know that this is a huge topic. You know, we've been emailing about it,
Yeah.
and the kind of similarities and differences between voice teachers and therapists or psychologists. And so I just wanted to maybe start by having us chat a little bit about our job description. Can you share with me your job description as you see it?
I'm not sure if I can put what I do in a clear order, but I think I could try, which is essentially I try to sit with my patients, make space for them to hear themselves in relation to another person and to be themselves in relation to another person and think about what's not feeling well, but also plug into what does feel good
Hmm.
and to be able to sit with patterns really honestly and to be able to interrupt them if that's what needs to be done or to strengthen other ones.
Yeah, when you say patterns, you mean just patterns of behavior?
No, I mean patterns of it's interesting. I think it's affect, patterns of affect and how they regulate those.
Hmm.
On a I think on a simplified, more colloquial basis, the way we've been talking about this in psychology is the way we feel, think, and behave. So interrupting those patterns.
Sure. Awesome. That's a great job description. I mean, I think for me as a voice teacher, I'm thinking, my goal is to help students find a sustainable, expressive tone that allows them to show their essence as an artist.
Mm, mm,
That's my job is to say, all right, where do you want to go? Great. And what is the most sustainable and artful way of getting there that
mm,
allows the world to see who you are and all that
mm,
you bring to your work as a performer.
Okay, glowing. This is a little bit of a humble brag.
Um,
Oh, that's amazing.
that's kind of, I mean, I literally I didn't keep notes about this. But I think that's on the top of my head. That's kind of what comes to me. And
Mm,
so, there's a lot of talk about, certainly, um, voice teachers and um, therapy and and
Mm,
you kind of just hinted to it as well that like other professions, there's an aspect certainly of listening, right? And
mhm,
and maybe mirroring or aspects of
mm,
therapy that but we all want to be very clear about what our lane is as
mm,
voice teachers. And I think because of that, my perception is that because of that, we have not always engaged in this conversation directly and
mm,
saying, all right, what are the similarities in what we do as voice teacher and psychologist or therapist, and what are the differences? And so I was wondering if maybe we can kind of just go back and forth and kind of think about what we think what we think similarities and differences may be.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
the first thing that comes off on the top of my head is that we both work one-on-one usually,
Mhm, mhm.
right? I mean, we're working seeing people individually, unless it's of course it's couples counseling. That's a different thing.
Mhm.
But oftentimes in a voice lesson scenario, it's one-on-one, right?
I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this because I think working from the framework of the affect regulation polyvagal theory, fundamentally, we're both dyadic regulators that work with individuals.
Oh, say more about that. That's
Yeah. Well,
scratching my itch.
is it? Well, I mean, I think, and this is, if people who know this will be like, duh, everybody's a dyadic regulator, because here's how dyadic regulation works. Like, as mammals, we bear children that don't have, we bear infants that don't have brain capacity. It's very, what's the word I'm trying to say? I'm getting nervous. Essentially, the rudimentary brain capacity that needs to develop, and
Mhm.
it develops so it can calibrate in the time and space in which they were born, right? So it's like
Sure.
they need time to calibrate, so they don't have a lot of intricacies in their brain functioning. And the way that they learn that is through another person, through a primary caregiver. And so if they're feeling something within their body, they might say, oh, this doesn't feel good. And a caregiver's job is to help them regulate that feeling,
Mm,
dyadically regulate it, to say, oh, you are eating for the first time. This is really uncomfortable. Or, oh, no, there is something wrong. We should be a little bit more concerned. This feeling doesn't feel good.
yeah.
Uh, right? So we learn to regulate ourselves through a supportive regulator, fundamentally.
Yeah.
And as teachers and as therapists, I think what we're doing when we're sitting with somebody who's learning, we're doing something very similar. Where we're sitting, we're saying, you're going to use my auxiliary mind, my ability to regulate my feeling, thinking, and behaving to be able to be more of yourself.
I
So I think,
love that. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's so
right?
much more erudite and put together than I could have done. So
It's and
that's so
it's
smart.
Yeah, it's fun. I also realized that I don't know what you do. Like, when I was thinking about this, I was like, oh yeah, it's a very intimate act to sit with somebody, because one of my gripes with psychology is that it's very much about sitting down within four walls and talking to one another and
Yeah.
being together.
Yeah.
But there's not, unless you're doing like movement or singing or anything like that, it's not what's the major paradigm, right?
Right.
And so these like fundamental ways in which we are in our body are excluded. And so when I was thinking about you, I was really wondering what that experience is like to sit in a classroom with your students.
Well, mentioning we're mostly one-on-one in the work that I do. I mean, the thing that I think is also a similarity is like we are present with students' vulnerable moments.
Mm,
And um, we are voice teachers toy with their students' identities. because the voice
Mm,
is immediately tied to, their identity as a human being, right? And so when we're making adjustments to that instrument inside that resides inside the singer, right? We
mm,
have to be very mindful
mm,
about how we give feedback, about how we encourage, about when we speak, when we do not speak. And I think there's a similarity there too, right? In our work. It's that we put our thoughts and feelings aside.
mm,
So the student or the client can kind of
mm,
remain the focus
mm,
and can feel as if they are being supported in that process. That makes
mhm.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It makes me think about expression. I think that's one thing when you were talking about the essence as part of your job role, supporting that development
Yeah.
of it. I think of that as a therapist job too, where we're really working to help somebody feel easeful in their body instead of full of dis-ease, right? They're not easy. They want to feel more easeful and be able to be more of themselves.
Yeah.
And it's about expressing, like not only expressing and being that. And the thing that I think about is how powerful that must be when somebody's expressing that through something that is very like I don't have a better word other than say like marginalized. Like if I were to go sing on a corner, people would be like, "Oh, it's New York, right?" Right?
Yeah.
Unless I'm busking or something, right? It's
Right.
not normal.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
not normalized behavior.
yeah.
The other thing that comes to me that I jotted down is that, because we're tending to work one-on-one with
Mm-hmm.
people, is that I think there can be an isolation and a loneliness
Mm-hmm.
that comes with our vocations
Mm-hmm.
because we are putting the student or the client kind of front and center and having to put our thoughts and feelings aside. And I was sharing this earlier in the podcast that this idea of, we're investing so much, right,
Mm-hmm.
in our people, and yet it's not a relationship. I mean, it's not a friendship, it's not that type of relationship. And so
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that research shows that that has the potential to create isolation and a
Mm-hmm.
sense of loneliness, right? And I think that that's something I certainly in my teaching have
Mm-hmm.
found that as an adjunct voice teacher, kind of I'm a boat in a very vast ocean, and I'm sometimes don't see my colleagues at all during
Mm-hmm.
the entire semester, right? So I'm very much alone with my
Mm-hmm.
thoughts and with my students, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's fine, and sometimes that's not as healthy as I would like it to be, right?
Yeah, totally.
Is that your experience too in terms of um, kind of one-on-one life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something about working individually within four walls. Part of the commonality is making space and helping somebody get to know themselves.
Hmm.
And part of that means, yeah, there's a boundary. You're only known up to a certain extent, teacher, therapist, but I don't get to be known in that
Right.
relationship. And yet that's my work every single day, every, working hour that I have. And that's definitely their loneliness is an occupational hazard.
I'm wondering maybe if we can pivot to some differences between our
Mm-hmm.
work. One of the things that I talked to my colleague, Dr. Felix Graham, about is that, in voice lessons, often a student's negative narrative will pop up.
Mm,
Well, I can't do this because da 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 da, right? And we can, I think as voice teachers, we can name those narratives, but
Mm,
it is not our place to delve into
mm,
the reason that those narratives exist necessarily and how they can become undone,
mm,
right? I think that's a difference. It's like I see that you're struggling with this. I see that
mm,
there's a belief that is holding you back from, I'm thinking of a particular
mm,
student um, that when they get in their way, it's it's as if like we have reverted 2 years in their work. But
mm,
when, and so I can say, I see you struggling and I sense this is what you're struggling with, but I can't be like, where does that come from? What is that? That's not my job,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Whereas that my perspective, my thought process is that certainly is if the client wants to you know look at that particular issue, that is what you're going to talk about.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. You're totally spot on. That's a huge difference. I actually didn't really think about that. Um, it's an obvious one, but yeah, we go there. And some of it is examining the past, but also some people examining the past in its present form. Like the past is
Hmm.
always with us, right? So it might be examining past experiences, family dynamics, but it also might be looking at how the past is showing up in their present. But we go there
Right,
ultimately. Yeah.
right. Yeah, and that's not our jurisdiction. We
Yeah.
got to be like, and I will often say to students, I'm like, I see this narrative coming up again and again for
Hmm.
you. And so I can I can name it when I
Mm,
see it, but it is up to you to
hmm.
either work with um, a therapist, talk to friends,
Mm,
family, journal. There are lots of different ways to get there, but
mm,
to really explore
hmm.
what the significance of that narrative is in your life. Was that
Yeah.
something that you said to you or somebody else said to you? And why do you choose to
Mm,
keep on hanging on to that? Right. And that
mm,
is not for me to know. That is not my
mhm.
business. Right. But this is the other main difference is like I refer out. Right. Like that is
Mm,
beyond my jurisdiction. As I said,
mhm,
this is where I refer out
mhm,
to someone like you who
mhm,
has that expertise. Right.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think about what you were talking about with contact collapse.
Hmm.
Whereas there's this, it's not only the age of social media, but I also think about it as the developmental stage where it's sort of like I want to just tell you everything and then work it out.
Yeah.
Help me work it out, but I'm going to overshare with the hope that it'll figure itself out. And absolutely being able to say, here's my lane. I'm not going to go all the way there because I think another big difference between you and I is evaluation. At the end of the day, you're giving a pass fail, a grade of some sort, a recommendation letter in the future, whereas I have the space to evaluate in a much different way. Right? I
Hmm.
will evaluate functioning and capacities of different sorts, but not at the end of the day give them a letter grade. That's for the therapy participant to be able to do themselves, to say, like, I feel better or I
Right.
feel as well, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, we're both assessing, but we're assessing with different um, endpoints.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super smart.
Hmm.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how you continue working to develop healthy, boundaried relationships with clients? Because I think that that's something that, again, that we do have in common that we have to be able to do.
Yeah. How to develop healthy relationships. Well, I think one thing that I've been thinking about, there's a big debate on what to call people who participate in therapy. Like, I'm a psychologist, I have this title. Who is the other person on the other end? Are they a patient? Are they a client? The term therapy participant has been emerging. I use a little bit older term, but not too old, called co-experimenter. And for
Ooh.
me, part of it is um, that sets a fundamental frame that they are experts of themselves. Right. So I think there's like a basic respect in terms of creating a healthy relationship, which is I can't know them better than them. They are the expert of themselves and they have a right to self-determination. So sort of thinking of the term co-experimenter is a way to sort of set the foundation of that healthy relationship. And then, I talk about space a lot. I think a lot about how somebody can be safe and without anxiety in relation to another person
Mhm.
and how they can feel a sense of belonging as themselves. So I think a big part of developing a healthy relationship is also that foundation of creating space. It's okay to have silence. It's okay to feel awkward. Um, but some of it is slowing down and okay with back and forth, the uncomfortableness of it.
Can you talk about how do you develop that rapport or that kind of
Mhm.
that code, that definition of safe space
Mhm.
with a new client?
The first appointment in therapy is really important for setting up a framework of saying, here's how I'm going to engage. Here's my expectations. How are you going to engage? What are your expectations? Right. Um, and checking in. So setting up a strong foundational frame from the outset and then checking in. I check in with my co-experimenters every, first 5 sessions. I check in depending on if they're, never done therapy or all has done therapy their whole life, sort of checking in 5 sessions. And then um, I follow research. So it's 16 sessions, there's often symptom relief. So I check in then, and then 25 sessions, there's another thing that happens, and 50 so I sort of check in and sort of
Mm,
ask, like, how are things going for you? How are you feeling? Same, better, or worse? So like it's about them and they know that.
yeah. So we would call that student-centered,
Yeah.
right?
What do you
It's
mean?
like meaning that this is just as you said, it's like this is nobody knows you better than you, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
same thing for the singer. It's like I have a lot of information, but you
Mhm,
have all the information about you.
mhm,
So
mhm.
you're the one who's telling me where we're going, where
Mm,
you want to go, right? What you want to accomplish during this time. And we're going to be co-experimenters. We're going to
mm.
use the voice lesson as a laboratory to make lots of different sounds, right?
Uh-huh.
And see which sound you respond to, right?
Yes.
And which one feels, I never talk about good or bad because those are wholly subjective. I talk about, is this
Mm,
sustainable or is this unsustainable, right?
mm,
And how do we find the sustainable path and how do we find that sustainability consistently, right? And so
mm.
that's why all of those light bulbs were going off because there's so much about what you're talking about that's actually very similar too. So that's a student-centered pedagogy.
You
Yeah.
know what I love so much about what you're saying, but it's playful. I think that's what happens in therapy, I often think about things being stuck.
Mm.
They're stuck in a certain rote pattern and it's difficult to find any space around it. And so part of it requires faith, but also play.
Yeah, like that play and that curiosity, I think has to be a centerpiece, right? And I think not only for the student or for the client, whatever, or co-experimenter, but for us too,
Hmm.
right? Because oh my gosh, it can get deadly really
Hmm.
fast. I mean, those sessions can feel very long if there's
Hmm.
not a growth mindset present, right?
Hmm. presence is a big, attention and presence is such a premium to be
Hmm.
able to have with somebody.
Yeah.
And being with somebody while they're playing is very sacred. It's somebody has a sense of freedom to be themselves in your presence and not feel shame so much that it shuts them down.
Isn't that the goal?
I know, it's so much easier said than done,
It
right? The
is.
reality of being in it with somebody is far more confusing. So I think there are some North Stars to follow, right? Curiosity is a huge one. Once I start feeling like I know what I'm doing, I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I'm like, it's okay to have like a sense of things are going right. But when I'm
Sure.
like, oh, this is what's happening, I've lost track of following somebody and I'm following myself. So
Mm,
yeah. When a student comes in and they show you their attachment style, their learning style, they're related, right? If you have a student that's coming in and they're like, da, 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 they're very anxious and wanting to reach out to you, and they're regulating through a dyad,
hmm.
right? Telling you, being with you. Then you have some students that are more avoidant, where they are more auto-regulators. Maybe they want to be with you, but they're not going to disclose that information as much. And then you have some students where they're a bit disorganized. Sometimes they're coming, sometimes they're going.
Mm,
They're often, you'll see those students needing a lot of structure and support. Um, and then there's some students that can more easily be with you and say, they don't seem overly like they're moving towards you for dyadic regulation or moving away from you because they need to just be on their own. They have some more flexibility to go back and forth. And they'd be like, oh,
sure.
having a hard day today, doing or having a hard year, right? They're able to tell you what's going on and be more fluid in their ability to regulate themselves.
Hmm.
And I think that sort of getting an understanding of, is this person fairly secure? Are they able to come and go? Have they shown that over time? Are there somebody who's more anxious, somebody who's more avoidant, or are they somebody who's a bit disorganized? With anxious people, I think that the sort of two things that I look at in all of these styles is where is the anxiety? Actually, three things. Where's the anxiety? How warm should you be? And to monitor how much shame is present in the conversation,
Mm,
right? So with the anxiety, is it that, do they need to go towards you or away from you kind of thing? Um, and then with the warmth, you really want to do, I don't want to say the opposite, but kind of the opposite of the way they're coming towards you. So they're very anxious. You want to be kind of neutral. You're there for them, you're boundaried, everything's going to be okay. You're an anchor.
hmm.
If somebody's avoidant, then and these are not the people that are going to tell you what's going on.
Right.
Like these are the people that are going to come in and they look like something's going on, right? Or you can repeatedly see things in their body, or I imagine their voice. And
Absolutely.
for these folks, if they're not telling you, you want to be more warm and work on consent building, right? Like
Mm,
um, really their sense of using another person to help them feel safe has been compromised in some way. So you really want to work on building safety and asking them permission to be able to engage with them.
yeah.
If somebody is disorganized, I often think this is fairly like not extreme, but these are going to be students that are often already having difficulty with academics and are going to need something that's highly structured or highly direct. they're going
Hmm.
to need more support. So when I think about like, how do you help a student? How do you talk to a student versus sort of knowing like what student's in front of you?
Right.
Uh, and
What's
then
kind of their baseline, day-to-day baseline?
in relation to you.
Yes. Yes. Right.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And then if there's like my understanding is that if from that place, if there's a fairly large shift, then it may be time for some questions or, you know, to whatever extent the student wants to share.
So there's three. This is where I'm like, huh, okay. First of all, also I want to say, this is good general psychological advice. And if you have a student that you have a question about, you need to consult with somebody at your student health department or a colleague. But generally, I think there's sort of three responsibilities for any teacher professional in terms of endorsement of a health concern, a mental health
Mhm.
concern. So if you have a student who's telling you that they're experiencing hallucinations that are visual or auditory, if they're thinking about killing themselves, harming somebody else, or know of a child or older adult that's being harmed, you really want to be direct and clear about them seeking out services right away. Right. That's you're not thinking about their attachment style. You don't really care about what's happening. At that point, that person's in a fairly high crisis situation.
Yeah.
The second kind of tier is that person that's either verbally or non-verbally sharing that they're having something that's interrupting their capacity to function. They're really depressed, they're really anxious, and it's persistent. That's another tier where it's a lower level tier, but one where you want to take action, right?
Mhm.
And then I think the one where you could take action is if somebody's adjusting, somebody's sharing with you, they're thinking about something, they are calibrating towards their stage of life or something like that, and it would be good for them if they explored, right? That's when you can say, you could talk to them about therapy, or you could say, why don't you think about journaling, right? There's different things that you can offer them at that point. But I think there's different phases or intensities of presentation that you want to say something
Mhm.
versus where it's an option to say something. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And thank you for so clearly outlining that. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things I try to do in my studio is I might say something like I've noticed there's been a change, in your presence and demeanor, and um I don't want to overstep. I don't want you to share anything you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to share. But I just wanted to let you know that I'd noticed it and that you're important to me. And
Mm-hmm.
if you need support in a way that is beyond my skill, I am happy to connect you to services that would be helpful. Does that, I mean, I'm feeling a little vulnerable because I like, oh God,
Yeah.
we haven't really talked about
Yeah.
this, but like, does that sound like an okay thing to say?
Yeah, this is a really vulnerable. This was the hardest part when David, you sent me questions earlier, and I looked at this one, and I was like, oh my God, what am I supposed to tell people? Because it's really hard. I don't know who the person is on the other end.
Of course. Yeah. And
Right?
yeah,
So what you say, I think, um, is it okay? I think you part of it is what's your responsibility based on their presenting concern. Are they telling you they want to harm themselves? Are they telling you they have a chronic issue? Or is this something that would be helpful for them to do? You have a different sense of responsibility at each.
sure.
Yeah.
I would say that most often tier two comes up where it's like things have definitely gone south.
Mm-hmm.
Just in terms of behavior and capacity,
Mm-hmm.
I think have really shifted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's usually when I encounter. I have thankfully not encountered um, folks who are at the kind of the top tier who need
Hmm.
immediate care.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think part of it in engaging with those folks who they're showing you that there's something that's not working for them, right? Part of it
Yeah.
is thinking about who are they? Are they somebody who's anxious and they're telling you all about what's happening? Those folks, I think, are often the people that come to therapy, and they're fantastic because you can share. I hear you talking about X, Y, or Z. There's a great resource to be able to explore that that might be adjunctive to your being able to express yourself here, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, I think of the avoidant folks are not going to tell you, they're going to show you.
Right.
And then it's the warmth and consent building. I noticed something. Can I talk to you about this? If I share it and you don't feel comfortable, please let me know. Right? It's that pretty consistent consent building with them. So
Yeah.
they feel safe to be able to obtain the information from you. Um, And then again, those folks that are disorganized are sort of coming and going. They're telling you and then they're retreating. Some of it is being really direct with them. I've noticed you come and going. I think you need to reach out for support, right?
Mhm.
Structure would be helpful for you to be able to have somebody consistent to see you through this.
Right. Gosh, these are such rich conversations.
I
And there's so much
know.
there. And so we're just going to have to have you come back.
That
We're
would
going to
be
talk. I would love
amazing.
that. I'm so grateful to you and for your knowledge and just said so many things that I had to just kind of feel my own steadiness because I was getting so excited about
Oh.
how you were talking about things and seeing the connections in what we do is really and the connections and also the things that are different
Mm,
and where we can really be aware of those similarities and differences
mm,
um and better support our students. I think
mhm,
that's really what I want to continue to get at because that's to me the art and practice side
mm.
of what we do.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is an amazing work. I really appreciate the conversation. It was so rich for me too. Really had me stand back and think about um, something about the power of really sharing your voice and how I can bring that into my own practice as a therapist too. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Several years ago, I was working with a therapist to process some unresolved issues in my life. And he shared with me that he had joined the New York City Gay Men's Chorus and as a result started taking voice lessons. One day he came into my session and exasperatedly said, "Oh my God, voice lessons are more therapy than therapy." Well, that can be true. Things are necessarily going to bubble up when we dare to let go and confront some of the narratives we have accepted about our voice, our body, and our identity. But as teachers, there's a way to engage with that level of vulnerability without overstepping our bounds. And there will be times, as my colleague Dr. Felix Graham noted in the first episode of this podcast, that we will need to and should refer a student to a licensed therapist, both for the student's welfare and for our own. In his book, Sound, Self, and Song, William Earl Jones argues that voice pedagogy hasn't always applied basic knowledge from the field of psychology. He writes, isolated in our artistic specialty, we have been slow to relate the work of psycholinguistics to the theory and practice of the teaching of singing. Slower, certainly, than we have been in attending to the results of recent research in the harder sciences of physiology and acoustics. Of course, we know that verbal behavior has significance for our work. Teachers and students talk to each other all the time. But it is less obvious that we are constantly adjusting our teaching in response to the student's language behavior, theirs not being ours. And for most of us, this has been an intuitive adjustment with only a superficial understanding of psychological clues offered. So there's a lot to chew on in this episode, and I know I'm still mulling this over. What's sticking with you? How do you feel like you may be able to engage in this conversation with your students? Sound off. You can email me at wholeheartedvoicepedagogy@gmail.com, or you can find me on the socials. My handle on most platforms is at Sisco Songs or at Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy, and I would love to hear from you. And please, as always, subscribe to this podcast on whatever corner of the interweb you found me. I'll be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks. I know I say it each time, but I mean it. We have some great guests and some fantastic conversations coming down the pike, so be sure to check back. More soon. Take care of you.